The gunshot shattered more than just Mia's kidney, it exposed 12 years of HOA tyranny that had driven 6 families from Willow Creek. When Karen Whitaker pulled the trigger over a Wi-Fi dispute, she had no idea she was about to face a mother's calculated vengeance and a community's long overdue reckoning. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The sun hung low in the suburban sky, casting a warm golden glow over Willow Creek, a quiet neighborhood where picket fences and manicured lawns hid the simmering tensions of its residents. At the center of this storm was the Thompson family, Lila, a single mother of 38, and her 16-year-old daughter, Mia, a bright, kind-hearted girl with dreams of becoming a nurse. Their modest 2-bedroom home sat at the corner of Maple Drive, a place they'd called home for 5 years, ever since Lila's messy divorce from Michael, who'd left them with nothing but debt and broken promises. Lila had worked double shifts at Mercy General Hospital to keep their small sanctuary afloat. Her calloused hands bore witness to countless hours of caring for others, while her own needs went unmet. The mortgage payments were always tight, the utilities sometimes delayed, but she'd managed to create a warm home for Mia. Their evening ritual of cooking dinner together had become sacred, a time when mother and daughter could decompress from their respective battles with the world. But peace was hard to come by in Willow Creek, where Karen Whitaker, the HOA president, ruled with an iron fist and a vindictive streak that had terrorized residents for over a decade. Karen's pristine colonial house stood like a fortress at the end of Elm Street, its perfectly maintained garden a stark contrast to the chaos she sowed in neighbors' lives. Lila stood in her kitchen on that fateful Tuesday evening, chopping vegetables for dinner, the rhythmic thud of the knife against the cutting board a small comfort in her chaotic world. The scent of garlic and onions filled the air, mingling with the vanilla candle Mia had lit on the windowsill. It was their tradition, small luxuries that made their modest home feel special. Mia sat at the worn wooden table, her laptop open, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she worked on a school project about community healthcare initiatives. The irony wasn't lost on Lila. Her daughter's passion for helping others mirrored her own calling as a nurse. Mia's auburn hair caught the kitchen light as she concentrated, her brow furrowed in the same way Lila's did when facing a difficult medical case. "Mom, I changed the Wi-Fi password again," Mia said casually, not looking up from her screen. "Mrs. Whitaker was hogging our bandwidth. I saw her smart TV connected to our network. Again. She's been streaming Netflix all afternoon while I'm trying to research for this paper." Lila sighed deeply, setting the knife down with more force than intended. The cutting board bore scars from years of meal preparation, much like their lives bore scars from years of struggle. "Mia, I told you to let me handle it. You know how she gets when challenged." The memory of their last encounter with Karen still stung. 3 months ago, Lila had politely asked Karen to stop using their internet connection during a chance meeting at the mailbox. Karen's response had been swift and cruel. A cascade of HOA violations appeared on their door the next day. Grass too long by half an inch, trash can visible from the street 15 minutes past pickup time, and a non-approved garden gnome that Mia had bought with her babysitting money. Karen Whitaker was the neighborhood's self-appointed dictator, a 52-year-old widow with steel gray hair and eyes to match. She'd ruled Willow Creek's HOA for 12 years, ever since her husband's death had left her with nothing but bitterness and a need to control everything around her. Her house was a monument to perfection, not a blade of grass out of place, not a single leaf on her pristine driveway. But beneath that manicured exterior lay a woman consumed by loneliness and spite. 4 months she'd been piggybacking off the Thompsons' Wi-Fi, claiming it was her right as HOA president to ensure community connectivity. It was a lie and everyone knew it. Karen's internet bill was 3 times higher than most residents because she refused to accept anything but the premium package. Yet she saw no contradiction in stealing from a struggling single mother. Lila had confronted her politely at first, asking her to stop, but Karen's responses were always laced with venom, threats of fines, complaints about their unmowed lawn, mowed every Saturday without fail, or petty violations like leaving a trash can out an hour too long after pickup. Each encounter left Lila feeling smaller, more vulnerable. Mia rolled her eyes, closing her laptop with a soft snap. "She's a bully, Mom. Someone needs to stand up to her. Mrs. Patterson told me Karen made her husband cry last week over their hedge being 2 inches too tall." 2 inches. Mr. Patterson is a veteran. He didn't deserve that humiliation. Lila's heart sank as she watched her daughter's hands clench into fists. She recognized that fire in Mia's eyes, the same determination that had gotten her through her parents' divorce, through the lean months when dinner was sometimes just toast and jam, through the nights when Lila came home exhausted and still had to help with homework. Mia had learned to fight from watching her mother survive, but Lila feared that same fighting spirit would make her a target. "I know she's wrong, sweetheart," Lila said, moving to sit beside Mia at the table. She reached for her daughter's hands, noting how they'd grown, no longer a child's hands but not quite a woman's either. But confronting Karen directly, it never ends well. "I've seen what she's done to the Hendersons, the Garcias, the Mills family. She has a way of turning small disputes into personal vendettas that consume entire lives." Mia's green eyes, so much like her father's, though Lila tried not to think about that, flashed with indignation. "So we just let her walk all over us? Mom, you work 60-hour weeks to pay for that internet. She has no right to steal it." "I'll talk to her tomorrow," Lila promised, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. The thought of another confrontation with Karen made her stomach churn. She didn't want conflict, not with Mia's college applications looming and her own job at the hospital demanding every ounce of her energy. The nursing shortage meant constant overtime, difficult patients and administrators who saw staff as expendable. The last thing she needed was drama at home too. But Mia's defiant grin told her this conversation was far from over. That expression was pure Michael, charming and determined and absolutely convinced of his own righteousness. It had attracted Lila once, but in their marriage that same stubbornness had led to affairs and abandonment. In Mia, it manifested as an unshakable moral compass that both worried and proud her mother. That night, Lila lay awake staring at the water stain on her bedroom ceiling, a souvenir from last winter's ice dam. Through the thin walls, she could hear Mia typing late into the night, probably working on another project or college essay. The girl never stopped pushing herself, determined to earn scholarships since they both knew Lila couldn't afford to pay for university outright. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Lila's mood as she prepared for another 12-hour shift at the hospital. She kissed Mia goodbye, noting her daughter's secretive smile. "Stay out of trouble," she warned, but Mia just waved her off with a laugh. Lila was in the middle of administering medication to a post-surgical patient when her phone buzzed with a call from Mia. The girl knew better than to call during work hours unless it was urgent. Lila stepped into the hallway, her heart already racing. "Mom, you need to come home. Now." Mia's voice was shaking, a mix of fear and righteous anger that Lila had never heard before. "What happened? Are you hurt?" Lila's training kicked in, assess, prioritize, act. "I'm not hurt, but Mom, Karen went crazy. She's completely lost it. Please just come home." Lila's hands trembled as she grabbed her purse and told her charge nurse about the emergency. The drive home felt endless, every red light an eternity, her mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. She'd worked enough emergency room shifts to know how quickly suburban disputes could escalate into violence. When she pulled into their driveway, the scene was like something from her nightmares. Mia stood on their front lawn, her school clothes torn, her face flushed with fury and streaked with tears. Her backpack lay scattered across the grass, papers and textbooks strewn like confetti. Across the street, Karen stood on her porch, her perfectly styled hair disheveled, screaming into her phone with wild gestures. "What happened?" Lila demanded, rushing to Mia's side and immediately checking her for injuries. No blood, no obvious trauma, but her daughter was shaking like a leaf. "I caught her in our Wi-Fi settings again," Mia said, her voice trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. "I came home for lunch and saw her on her porch with her laptop. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore, Mom. She had our router page open and was trying to change the password to something she'd remember." Lila felt her blood pressure spike. "So you confronted her?" "I walked over and asked her to stop. Politely, just like you taught me. But she started screaming about how I was a disrespectful little brat who needed to learn her place. She said she was the HOA president and had every right to access any internet in the neighborhood for security purposes." The absurdity of Karen's claim would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. Lila could picture the scene, her composed, articulate daughter trying to reason with a woman who'd long since abandoned logic in favor of petty tyranny. "Then what?" Lila prompted, though she dreaded the answer. Mia's composure cracked. "She came at me, Mom. Actually came at me. She grabbed my backpack and threw it in their fountain, saying my textbooks were propaganda and that I needed to learn respect. When I tried to get my things, she pushed me. Art. I fell on their driveway and scraped my knees." Lila's vision went red. She looked at her daughter's torn jeans, saw the bloody scrapes on her knees that Mia had tried to clean with tissues. This wasn't just about Wi-Fi anymore. This was assault. This was a grown woman physically attacking a teenager. "Stay here," Lila said, her voice deadly calm. She marched across the street to face Karen, who was now hanging up her phone with a satisfied smirk. Karen's eyes narrowed as Lila approached, but there was something different in her expression. A wild gleam that suggested she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. "You and your brat think you can humiliate me?" she spat, her voice shrill and unhinged. "I've been the pillar of this community for 12 years. I maintain property values. I enforce standards. You don't get to tell me what I can or can't do. Karen, you pushed my daughter. You destroyed her schoolwork. This has gone way too far." Lila kept her voice steady, drawing on years of de-escalating situations with agitated patients and their families. Karen's face twisted into something ugly and cruel. "Your precious little princess thinks she's so smart, doesn't she? Walking around here like she owns the place with her college applications and her perfect grades. You think you're both so much better than everyone else." The words revealed the poisonous envy that had been festering in Karen's heart. Here was the truth. She resented Lila's close relationship with Mia, resented their quiet contentment despite their financial struggles, resented their ability to find joy in simple things like cooking dinner together or watching old movies on Friday nights. "This isn't about superiority," Lila said, fighting to keep her voice level. "It's about basic respect. You're stealing our internet and now you've physically attacked my daughter. I could call the police right now." Karen laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Go ahead. Call them. You think they'll believe a divorced nurse over the HOA president? I've been building relationships in this community since before you moved into that little house. Chief Morrison is my neighbor. His wife plays bridge with me every Thursday." The threat hung in the air between them, revealing the network of influence Karen had cultivated over the years. It wasn't just about homeowners association rules, it was about power, about who belonged and who didn't, about who deserved protection and who was expendable. "You're pathetic," Mia's voice cut through the tension. She disobeyed her mother's instruction to stay put and now stood at Lila's shoulder, her green eyes blazing with contempt. "You're just a sad, lonely woman who gets off on controlling people because your own life is empty. No wonder your husband died just to get away from you." The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Karen's face went white, then purple with rage. For a moment, Lila thought the older woman might actually strike Mia. Instead, she pointed a shaking finger at both of them. "You'll regret this," she whispered, her voice trembling with fury. "Both of you. I'll make sure this neighborhood knows exactly what kind of people you are. You think you've seen harassment? You haven't seen anything yet." She stormed into her house, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. Lila pulled Mia close, her heart pounding with fear and pride in equal measure. Her daughter had found the one weapon that could truly hurt Karen, the truth about her loneliness and irrelevance. That evening, as they sat down for a quiet dinner of leftover soup and grilled cheese sandwiches, the doorbell rang. Lila opened it to find Karen standing there transformed. Gone was the disheveled, wild-eyed woman from earlier. Instead, she wore a crisp blazer and held a manila folder, her gray hair perfectly styled, her makeup immaculate. But her eyes still held that dangerous glitter. "This is a formal HOA violation notice," she said, her voice professionally cold as she thrust the folder into Lila's hands. "Your daughter's behavior today violated community guidelines regarding respect for HOA officials and destruction of private property." Lila stared at the papers in disbelief. The charges were absurd: verbal assault of an HOA representative, trespassing on private property, and inciting neighborhood discord. Each carried a fine, totaling $1,500. "You can't be serious," Lila breathed. "She's 16 years old and you attacked her." "The security camera footage tells a different story," Karen replied smoothly. 48 hours to pay the fines, or I'll be forced to begin foreclosure proceedings. It's all spelled out in the HOA charter you signed when you bought your house." The mention of foreclosure sent ice through Lila's veins. She'd scraped together their down payment 5 years ago, working triple shifts and selling everything of value she owned. The house represented stability for Mia, a chance at a normal teenage life despite their circumstances. Mia appeared in the doorway behind her mother. "You're lying," she said simply. "You don't have security cameras facing our yard." Karen's smile was razor-thin. "Try me." After Karen left, Lila sat at their kitchen table reading through the HOA documents with growing horror. The charter was a maze of legalese, but the enforcement provisions were clear. Karen had broad authority to levy fines and begin collection proceedings. Whether her charges would hold up in court was irrelevant if Lila couldn't afford a lawyer to fight them. "We should call Dad," Mia suggested quietly. Lila's laugh was bitter. Your father hasn't returned a phone call in 2 years, sweetheart. He's busy with his new wife and her kids. We're on our own just like always. That night, Lila made the mistake of looking up Karen's history online. What she found chilled her to the bone. Over the past 5 years, 6 families had left Willow Creek after disputes with the HOA. Each had been driven out by escalating fines and legal harassment. The Hendersons had lost their home to foreclosure after accumulating $15,000 in penalties for landscaping violations. The Garcia family had fled in the middle of the night, leaving behind years of mortgage payments rather than face Karen's relentless persecution. The pattern was always the same: start with minor violations, escalate to personal attacks, then use the HOA's legal authority to destroy lives. Karen wasn't just a bully, she was a predator who'd perfected her system of psychological warfare. Lila knew they were in real danger. The next morning brought a surprise that changed everything. Lila was leaving for work when she noticed a police cruiser parked across the street. Officer Rodriguez, a young patrolman she recognized from the hospital, was taking notes while Karen gestured animatedly at their house. "Mrs. Thompson?" Officer Rodriguez approached her with obvious reluctance. "I need to ask you some questions about an incident yesterday." Lila's heart sank as Karen's plan became clear. "Of course. What can I tell you?" "Mrs. Whitaker filed a complaint alleging that your daughter trespassed on her property and threatened her. She says she has video evidence." The lie was so audacious it took Lila's breath away. "Officer Rodriguez, I was here. Karen attacked my daughter and destroyed her schoolwork. Mia never threatened anyone." The young officer looked uncomfortable. "I have to follow up on all complaints, ma'am. Is your daughter available to speak with me?" Mia appeared as if summoned, her school bag slung over her shoulder. Despite everything, she'd cleaned her scraped knees and was preparing for another day of classes and college applications. Her resilience broke Lila's heart. "I'm here," Mia said simply. "What do you want to know?" Officer Rodriguez was gentle but thorough in his questioning. Mia recounted the events calmly, her honesty evident in every word. But Lila could see the doubt in his eyes, a teenage girl's word against a pillar of the community. "The thing is," Karen interjected, appearing beside them with perfect timing, "I do have security footage. From my doorbell camera. It clearly shows this girl on my property, using threatening language." "I'd like to see that footage," Officer Rodriguez said. Karen's smile was triumphant. "Of course. I'll have my lawyer send it to the police station by this afternoon." Lila felt trapped in a nightmare. Karen was methodically constructing a false narrative, using the system's natural bias toward authority figures and property owners. A single mother and her teenage daughter were no match for a woman with 12 years of community connections and unlimited time to plan her revenge. That afternoon, while Lila was at work, the situation exploded beyond all reason. She was checking on a patient in the cardiac unit when her phone rang. Mia's number. Lila stepped into the hallway to answer. "Mom?" Mia's voice was barely a whisper, weak and thready in a way that sent terror racing through Lila's veins. "Mom, help me. She shot me." The phone slipped from Lila's numb fingers, clattering on the hospital floor. Around her, the familiar sounds of the cardiac unit, monitors beeping, ventilators whooshing, nurses discussing patient care, became a distant roar. She grabbed the phone and ran, not caring about the chart in her hands, not caring about her patients, not caring about anything except getting to her daughter. "Hold on, baby," she sobbed into the phone as she raced toward the parking garage. "I'm coming. Mia, stay on the line. Talk to me." But the line had gone dead. Lila's hands shook so violently she could barely grip the steering wheel. She called 911 as she sped through red lights and stop signs, her voice breaking as she screamed her address and that her daughter had been shot. The dispatcher's calm questions felt surreal. Who shot her? Was the shooter still on scene? What was the nature of the wounds? "I don't know," Lila cried. "I just know my baby's been shot and I need to get to her." The drive to Willow Creek felt endless, every second stretched into eternity. Lila's mind raced with medical knowledge she didn't want to apply. Entrance wounds and exit wounds, blood loss and shock, the critical golden hour that meant the difference between life and death. She was a trauma nurse. She'd seen what bullets could do to young bodies. When she turned onto Maple Drive, the street was chaos. Police cars, ambulances, fire trucks, and neighbors gathered on their lawns with expressions ranging from shock to morbid curiosity. Lila abandoned her car in the middle of the road and ran toward the cluster of emergency vehicles parked in front of their house. "Mia," she screamed, pushing through the crowd of first responders. "Where's my daughter?" "Ma'am, you need to stay back." A paramedic tried to intercept her, But Lila's years of hospital experience gave her authority even in crisis. "I'm a nurse," she said, her voice steadying with purpose. "That's my daughter. Let me through." What she saw nearly brought her to her knees. Mia lay on a stretcher beside their front steps, her school clothes cut away, her young body connected to monitors and 4 lines. Her face was pale but conscious, her green eyes finding her mother's across the chaos. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of medical equipment and barking radios. Lila dropped to her knees beside the stretcher, her trained eye automatically assessing her daughter's condition. The bullet wound was in Mia's lower back, just above her left hip. The paramedics had started in 4 and were preparing for transport, their efficiency telling her this was serious. "What happened, sweetheart?" Lila asked, taking Mia's hand while staying out of the paramedics' way. "I came home from school early," Mia whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Had a headache. Karen was in our backyard again trying to get to our router box. When she saw me, she started screaming about how I'd humiliated her, how I needed to learn respect. I tried to go inside but she followed me. She had a gun, Mom. She said she was going to teach me a lesson about talking back to my betters." The paramedic working on Mia's 4 looked up. "Ma'am, we need to transport now. The bullet appears to have damaged the kidney. She needs surgery immediately." As they loaded Mia into the ambulance, Lila turned to see Karen Whitaker in handcuffs beside a police car. The woman's perfect facade had crumbled entirely. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, her eyes wild with the realization of what she'd done. "Where is she?" Lila demanded, her voice raw with anguish and fury. She started toward Karen, but Officer Rodriguez gently held her back. "Mrs. Thompson, you need to go with your daughter. We'll handle this." But Lila couldn't resist confronting her daughter's attacker. "Why?" she screamed across the distance between them. "She's 16 years old. Why would you shoot a child?" Karen's response chilled everyone within earshot. Her voice was eerily calm, matter-of-fact. "She disrespected me. In front of the whole neighborhood. Children need to learn consequences." The words revealed the depth of Karen's delusion. She genuinely believed that shooting a teenager was justified punishment for hurt feelings. 12 years of unchecked power had warped her perception of reality until she saw herself as judge, jury, and executioner for perceived slights. Lila rode in the ambulance with Mia, holding her daughter's hand as the paramedics worked. The young woman who'd been preparing college applications that morning was now fighting for her life, her future uncertain, her body broken by a neighbor's twisted sense of justice. At the hospital, the same hospital where Lila had worked just hours earlier, the trauma team took over. Dr. Hassan, the chief of surgery, met them at the door. He'd operated on dozens of gunshot victims, but his expression was grimmer than usual as he examined Mia's injuries. "The bullet entered through the lower back and appears to have damaged the left kidney," he told Lila privately. "We need to operate immediately to control the bleeding, but I have to be honest, the damage may be extensive. We might not be able to save the kidney." Lila nodded, her medical training helping her process information that would have devastated any other mother. "What about the other organs?" "Spine involvement. The spine appears to be intact and the bullet missed the major vessels. She's lucky in that regard. But kidney function." He trailed off, unwilling to make promises he couldn't keep. As Mia was wheeled into surgery, Lila sat in the waiting room surrounded by colleagues who'd become family over her years at Mercy General. Nurses from her unit brought coffee and sandwiches she couldn't eat. Doctors stopped by to offer encouragement and medical opinions. The head of nursing sat with her, holding her hand during the longest hours of her life. Hours passed in a blur of surgical updates and growing dread. The kidney damage was worse than initially thought. Dr. Hassan emerged from the operating room with the news Lila had been dreading. They'd been forced to remove Mia's left kidney entirely. "She's stable," he assured her, "but she'll need lifelong monitoring. The remaining kidney should be able to compensate, but she'll be more susceptible to infections and blood pressure problems. And if anything ever happens to the remaining kidney..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Lila understood the implications. Her daughter would live, but her life had been fundamentally changed by one woman's ego and rage. When Mia woke up in the ICU, her first words were an apology. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have run when I saw her coming." Lila's tears fell freely as she stroked her daughter's hair. "You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart. Nothing. This is not your fault." But even as she comforted Mia, Lila's mind was already working. Karen Whitaker would face criminal charges, but that wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. The woman had destroyed her daughter's health, shattered their sense of security, and revealed the ugly truth about power unchecked by compassion or consequence. As Mia dozed fitfully in her hospital bed, connected to monitors and 4 drips, Lila began planning her vengeance. It wouldn't be enough to see Karen imprisoned. She wanted the woman to face the same kind of systematic destruction she'd inflicted on others. She wanted Karen to experience powerlessness, to understand what it felt like to be at someone else's mercy. The plan began to form slowly, methodically, with the same careful attention to detail Lila brought to patient care. Karen had built her power base through connections, intimidation, and legal manipulation. Those same tools could be turned against her, but it would require patience, strategy, and allies. Lila started by reaching out to the families Karen had driven from Willow Creek. She found the Hendersons living in a cramped apartment across town, still recovering financially from the foreclosure Karen had engineered. The Garcias had moved 3 states away but still carried the trauma of their experience. Each family had a story of escalating harassment, manipulated rules, and legal threats designed to break them. "We tried to fight her," Mrs. Henderson told Lila over the phone, her voice heavy with old pain. "But she had lawyers, connections, time on her side. We were working 2 jobs just to keep up with the mortgage, let alone hire attorneys." But Lila had something those other families hadn't: a daughter fighting for her life in a hospital bed, a story that could generate sympathy and outrage, and most importantly, a community finally ready to see Karen for what she really was. The media attention began almost immediately. The story had everything local news loved: suburban violence and abuse of authority, a teenage victim with college dreams. Within hours of the shooting, reporters were camped outside Mercy General, seeking interviews with the family of the HOA shooting victim. Lila was strategic in her media appearances. She didn't rant or rave about Karen. Instead, she spoke quietly about Mia's dreams, her volunteer work at the animal shelter, her plans to study nursing and follow in her mother's footsteps. She let the contrast speak for itself: a promising young woman nearly killed over a Wi-Fi password dispute. "My daughter believed in justice," Lila told the Channel 7 News crew, Mia's hospital bed visible in the background. "She thought if you stood up to bullies, if you told the truth, things would get better. She nearly died for that belief." The story went viral within hours. #JusticeForMia trended on social media as people shared their own HOA horror stories. Legal experts weighed in on the broad powers granted to homeowner associations. Child advocates called for reform. But Lila's real weapon wasn't social media. It was the community meeting she organized for the following week. She'd learned from Karen's own playbook that the most effective attacks were public and systematic. She invited every current and former resident of Willow Creek to share their experiences with Karen's leadership. The turnout exceeded all expectations. The community rallied around the Thompson family in ways that restored some faith in humanity. Neighbors organized meal trains, covering their expenses during Mia's extended hospital stay. Local businesses donated gift cards and supplies. The high school set up a scholarship fund in Mia's name, raising enough money to cover her first 2 years of college tuition. Most meaningful was the support from other HOA abuse survivors. The Henderson family visited regularly, sharing their own stories of recovery and resilience. Mrs. Patterson, despite her age, became a fierce advocate for HOA reform, testifying before the city council about the need for oversight and accountability. "What happened to Mia could have been any of our children," she told the packed council chambers. "We trusted Karen Whitaker with authority over our community, and she used it to terrorize us. We need laws to prevent this from ever happening again." The legislative response was swift and comprehensive. The Mia Thompson Act became a model for HOA reform nationwide, establishing mandatory oversight, limiting fine structures, and creating appeal processes for residents facing harassment. Other states began adopting similar legislation, inspired by the courage of a teenage girl who'd paid such a high price for speaking truth to power. But the road to recovery remained long and difficult. Mia's physical therapy sessions were grueling, designed to help her remaining kidney function optimally and rebuild her core strength after the surgery. Some days she made progress. Others she cried from frustration and pain. "I used to run 3 miles without thinking about it," she told her physical therapist during a particularly difficult session. "Now I get winded walking to the mailbox." Dr. Hassan monitored her progress closely, adjusting medications and activity levels as her body slowly adapted to functioning with one kidney. The prognosis was cautiously optimistic. With proper care, she could live a relatively normal life. But relatively normal wasn't the same as the unlimited future she'd envisioned before the shooting. Lila struggled with her own trauma, though she tried to hide it from Mia. Every unexpected noise made her heart race. She installed security cameras, changed all the locks, and found herself checking on Mia obsessively throughout the night. The trust she'd once felt in their neighborhood, their community, their basic safety had been shattered as completely as her daughter's kidney. "You need counseling," her supervisor at the hospital told her gently after Lila broke down during a particularly stressful shift. "You can't pour from an empty cup, Lila. Take care of yourself so you can take care of Mia." The therapy sessions were painful but necessary. Dr. Rebecca Williams, a trauma specialist who worked with families of violence victims, helped both Lila and Mia process their experience and begin to rebuild their sense of safety and control. "What Karen did to you wasn't just about a Wi-Fi password," Dr. Williams explained during one of their joint sessions. "It was about power and control, about someone who couldn't tolerate being challenged or contradicted. Understanding that helps us process the randomness and unfairness of it all." Slowly, painfully they began to heal. Mia returned to school part-time, determined not to let Karen's violence derail her educational goals. Her classmates had mixed reactions. Some treated her like a hero, others whispered and stared, fascinated by proximity to such dramatic violence. She learned to navigate the attention with grace that amazed her mother. "I refuse to be defined by what she did to me," Mia declared one evening as she worked on college application essays. "She took my kidney, but she doesn't get to take my dreams." The essay she wrote about her experience was powerful and raw, describing not just the physical trauma but the emotional journey of recovery and advocacy. When she was accepted to 3 different nursing programs with full scholarships, the celebration felt like a victory against more than just college admissions. It was proof that Karen's attempt to destroy their future had failed. The civil lawsuit against Karen and the HOA took 2 years to resolve, but the settlement was substantial, enough to cover Mia's medical expenses, establish a trust fund for her future care, and provide financial security Lila had never dared dream of. More importantly, it sent a message to HOA boards everywhere that abuse of power carried serious consequences. Karen's appeals were unsuccessful. Legal experts testified that her crimes represented a clear pattern of escalating abuse that culminated in attempted murder. The systematic nature of her harassment, combined with the financial fraud, painted a picture of someone who'd completely lost touch with appropriate boundaries and consequences. The defendant showed no remorse during the trial, the appeals court noted in their decision upholding her conviction. Her actions terrorized an entire community and nearly cost a young woman her life over the most trivial of disputes. The sentence reflects the gravity of her crimes and the need to protect society from someone who clearly cannot be trusted with any form of authority. Meanwhile, Willow Creek began to transform under new leadership. The reformed HOA board, elected by residents who'd experienced Karen's tyranny firsthand, focused on genuine community building rather than petty enforcement. Common areas were improved, neighborly activities were organized, and the toxic atmosphere of surveillance and punishment was replaced by cooperation and mutual support. The Thompsons became symbols of resilience in their community. Lila's advocacy for HOA reform made her a sought-after speaker at community meetings across the state. She balanced her nursing career with her new role as a public advocate, using her medical expertise and personal experience to push for legislation protecting vulnerable residents from HOA abuse. Mia thrived in her nursing program, her personal experience with both sides of the healthcare system giving her unique insights into patient care. Her professors were impressed by her maturity and compassion, qualities forged through trauma but refined into genuine wisdom. "She's going to be an extraordinary nurse," her clinical instructor told Lila during Mia's second year. "She has an intuitive understanding of what patients need, both medically and emotionally. Her experience has given her empathy you can't teach." The scholarship fund established in Mia's name grew into a broader program supporting children of violence, providing not just financial assistance but counseling services and mentorship programs. Other families facing similar trauma found hope and practical support through the foundation Lila established. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in Willow Creek itself. Property values actually increased after Karen's removal, as the neighborhood's reputation shifted from "that place with the crazy HOA lady" to a community that stands up for what's right. New families moved in specifically because of the reformed governance structure and supportive atmosphere. 5 years after the shooting, Mia graduated summa cum laude from nursing school. At the graduation ceremony, she spoke about her journey from victim to advocate, her voice steady and strong as she addressed her classmates and their families. "I learned that healing isn't just about recovering from what's been done to you," she said, her green eyes finding her mother's in the audience. It's about using your experience to prevent others from suffering the same harm. That's what nursing is, taking pain and transforming it into compassion, taking knowledge and using it to heal. Lila's tears of pride were matched by those of neighbors who'd become extended family, colleagues who'd supported them through the darkest days, and even some of Karen's former victims who'd found their own paths to healing and justice. The house on Maple Drive was finally peaceful. The Wi-Fi password was changed regularly now, not to keep anyone out but because Mia had developed strong cybersecurity habits during her healthcare information systems courses. The modest garden bloomed with vegetables and flowers tended by both mother and daughter, a symbol of life persisting despite attempts to destroy it. Sometimes, usually late at night when pain medication wore off or stress-triggered memories, the trauma resurfaced. But Lila and Mia had learned to face those moments together, to comfort each other through flashbacks and fears, to celebrate small victories and major milestones alike. Karen Whitaker's name rarely came up in conversation anymore. She'd become irrelevant to their story, a cautionary tale about unchecked power and personal demons, but not the defining element of their lives. The woman who tried to destroy them had instead, inadvertently, made them stronger and more united than ever. On quiet evenings, when Mia studied at the kitchen table and Lila prepared dinner, they sometimes talked about the future. Mia's dreams had evolved. She wanted to work in trauma nursing, specializing in helping children and families navigate medical crises. Lila planned to eventually leave bedside nursing for full-time advocacy work, using her platform to protect other communities from the kind of systematic abuse they'd endured. "Do you ever regret fighting back?" Lila asked one evening, watching her daughter review flashcards for her pediatric nursing rotation. Mia looked up, considering the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "I regret that someone was so broken they thought shooting a teenager was appropriate. I regret that other families had to suffer in silence for so long. But I don't regret standing up to her. If we hadn't fought, she'd still be terrorizing people." The truth of that statement was evident in the reformed community around them. Other neighborhoods had sought their advice in dealing with abusive HOAs. Legislation modeled on the Mia Thompson Act had prevented countless families from experiencing similar harassment. Their pain had purpose beyond their personal healing. As the sun set over Willow Creek on another peaceful evening, casting that same golden glow that had once illuminated their first confrontation with Karen, Lila reflected on the journey they'd traveled. The scars remained, physical, emotional, and psychological. Mia would always live with the reality of having only one kidney, would always be more vulnerable to certain health risks, would always carry the memory of being shot by a neighbor over something as trivial as internet access. But they'd survived. More than that, they'd transformed their trauma into a force for positive change, their victimization into advocacy, their pain into power. Karen Whitaker had tried to teach them about their place in the world, about respect and authority and consequences. Instead, she taught them about resilience and justice and the strength that comes from refusing to be broken by someone else's brokenness. The neighborhood was quiet now, truly peaceful in a way it had never been during Karen's reign of terror. Children rode bicycles on driveways without fear of violations. Gardens grew according to their owners' preferences rather than HOA-mandated guidelines. Neighbors helped each other with genuinely neighborly concern rather than the surveillance and reporting that had once characterized Willow Creek. And in the modest house on Maple Drive, a mother and daughter continued their evening routine, cooking together, talking about their days, planning for futures that seemed brighter than either had dared imagine during those dark hours in the hospital. They'd learned that vengeance wasn't always about destroying your enemy. Sometimes it was simply about refusing to let your enemy destroy you. Outside, the streetlights flickered on as darkness settled over Willow Creek. Inside, Lila and Mia cleaned up after dinner, their quiet conversation punctuated by comfortable silences and shared smiles. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Mia's clinical rotations, Lila's advocacy work, the ongoing process of healing and growth that defined their lives now. But tonight, they were simply a mother and daughter who had faced the worst and emerged stronger, their bond deepened by shared trauma and strengthened by mutual support. They were proof that sometimes the best revenge against those who try to break you is simply refusing to stay broken, and using your healing to help others find their own strength. The Wi-Fi password on their router now read, "Still Here 2025. A simple declaration that they'd survived, they'd endured, and they weren't going anywhere. It was a message Karen would never see from her prison cell, but it didn't matter. The message wasn't for her anyway. It was for themselves, for their community, and for anyone else facing their own version of petty tyranny disguised as authority. They were still here. They were still fighting. And they would never stop standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. Center was packed with neighbors Lila barely knew, many carrying folders of documentation, fines, legal threats, photographs of alleged violations. As each person told their story, a pattern emerged that was even worse than Lila had imagined. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow whose husband had cried over a hedge dispute, revealed that Karen had threatened to force her into a nursing home by declaring her house uninhabitable due to minor maintenance issues. The Johnsons, a young couple with twins, described how Karen had tried to ban children's bicycles from driveways, claiming they were unsightly and violated aesthetic guidelines. Most disturbing was the testimony of David Chin, a landscape architect who'd moved to Willow Creek hoping to improve his property value. Karen had systematically rejected every improvement he'd proposed, forcing him to spend thousands on consultations with approved contractors who happened to be Karen's friends. She doesn't just find people, Chin explained to the rapt audience. She creates a system where you can't win. Every solution she offers costs money that goes to her network of allies. It's not about community standards, it's about profiting from conflict. As the stories poured out, Lila saw the real scope of Karen's operation. It wasn't just petty tyranny, it was systematic exploitation disguised as community management. Karen had turned the HOA into a personal kingdom funded by neighbors' fear and desperation. The community's anger was palpable, but Lila channeled it into action. They voted unanimously to dissolve the current HOA board and demand a forensic audit of the association's finances. They organized a recall petition to remove Karen from any position of authority, though her arrest had already effectively ended her reign. More importantly, they contacted a civil rights attorney who specialized in HOA abuse cases. Sarah Martinez had spent years fighting homeowner associations that exceeded their authority, and she was fascinated by the documentation Lila's neighbors had assembled. "This isn't just about your daughter," Sarah told Lila during their first meeting. "This woman has been running a racketeering operation for years. The pattern of harassment, the financial connections, the systematic targeting of vulnerable residents, it's all grounds for a massive civil lawsuit." The legal case took months to develop, but it was worth the wait. Sarah's team uncovered financial irregularities going back 5 years. Karen had been inflating maintenance costs and funneling contracts to companies she had financial interests in. She'd used HOA funds for personal legal battles and had even been paying herself an unauthorized salary for years. But the criminal case moved faster. Karen was charged with attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and a host of financial crimes related to her HOA management. The attempted murder charge carried a potential sentence of 25 years to life. During the trial, Lila sat in the front row every day, a visible reminder of the cost of Karen's actions. Mia, still recovering but determined to see justice done, testified via video link from her hospital bed. Her quiet strength and obvious pain moved the jury to tears. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: security footage from neighboring houses that contradicted Karen's claims, medical testimony about Mia's injuries, and a parade of witnesses describing years of harassment and abuse. Karen's defense attorney tried to portray her as a dedicated community volunteer who'd snapped under pressure, but the systematic nature of her crimes made that narrative impossible to sustain. This wasn't a moment of madness, it was the culmination of years of escalating abuse of power. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Karen was sentenced to 28 years in prison, 25 for attempted murder and additional time for the financial crimes. At 52, it was effectively a life sentence. As Karen was led away in shackles, she finally seemed to comprehend the magnitude of her downfall. The woman who'd once controlled every aspect of neighborhood life was now completely powerless, her future determined by corrections officers and parole boards. But for Lila, the victory was bittersweet. Mia's recovery was slow and uncertain. The remaining kidney was functioning well, but she tired easily and had to give up many of the activities that had defined her teenage years. The soccer team, the hiking club, the summer job at the community pool, all were impossible now. Worse was the psychological impact. Mia had nightmares about the shooting, panic attacks when she heard unexpected noises, and a wariness around strangers that broke Lila's heart. The confident, optimistic girl who'd stood up to a bully had been replaced by someone who jumped at shadows. "I keep thinking about what I could have done differently," Mia confided to her mother one evening as they sat together in the hospital room that had become their second home. "If I'd just ignored her, if I'd called you first, if I'd run when she started yelling." "Stop," Lila said firmly, taking her daughter's hands. "You did nothing wrong. Nothing. You stood up to a bully because that's what we taught you to do. The fact that she responded with violence says everything about her and nothing about you.